5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
I know that's what I'm used to, right? Geoff and Kira live.
we're back.
We're back.
What is this, episode 35?
Episode 36.
Oh, shit.
Now.
Damn it, I always get it wrong.
I mean-
I can't wait till it's like episode 412, and it's like episode 415.
And we'll
We have
still
no
be
idea.
figuring out what episode it is and such. The
I can never
joys
remember
of TV radio.
No mask today, huh?
No, we should all have our masks on.
Mark, where's your mask?
I mean,
We have a special guest with us today,
a
guys.
very, very special
Yes,
guest.
we're super excited to have him in town, and he's happy that he's here, and we can talk all about his amazing work in nuclear and talk about the climate change and how that relates and all of that. So
Mark.
we have Mark Schneider.
Mark Schneider, how are you?
Oh, I am amazing. This is great. This is so much fun. Like, it's super cool to do this. And live, like doing these
Yes.
live, it's even more fun
Yeah.
than
yeah.
pre-recorded.
Can't edit it.
No, I mean, not that I care.
Put the filters on,
Yeah.
you know, like do black and white.
do the different social media filters.
Right, yeah.
You know,
You have a little heart freckle.
Yes. Fox ears.
Foxy ears.
My
It's-
7-year-old would love it.
Right? She'd be like,
Yeah.
I saw it. I watched your show.
And you know, speaking of the social media world and everything, it is amazing how I met you through social media, just through Twitter and through. It's amazing how it's connecting people.
You know,
2020.
it absolutely is. It's crazy. I went to New York at the beginning of the year, and I just, to go up to do a podcast, I sent a tweet out, and my itinerary was full of people that I'd met on Twitter.
Wow.
That I got, I had a guy come in from Connecticut. We had like a 4-hour launch. I ended up having Adam Townsend. He's a big tech
yeah.
guy. I had coffee with him. So it's just crazy getting to meet all these people. And then I happened to come out here, and my cousin's watching this, live with us. And for his birthday, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be, down in Orange County. Why don't I just drive up there? And, it gives an opportunity. I can, meet you two, and just be a lot of fun. So it's just a great way to kind of share our experience and, and make my trip even more, impactful.
Yeah, very colorful. You get to be on our show.
It's great how it works out in that way. And so welcome to. You've been to Los Angeles before? You're from.
I'm from Oregon originally, and I went to the Disney thing as a kid, and when I was in about 2007, I flew into LA to go to some training out in Oxnard for a couple of weeks, and then it's not a lot of experience in LA. Never driven here. This is the first time. It's
Yeah. What did it say? Today's Saturday. It's not too bad. Today's Sunday.
Yeah, today's Saturday. Yeah.
So it's not too bad.
I mean, it's not as bad as DC, but worse than where I live. So
DC's the roundabouts. You just
Yeah.
get stuck in the roundabout and you're like, where the hell am I? Get me out of this.
New Jersey's are even worse.
Oh, really?
They got like the eight wide roundabouts.
No, thank you.
I mean, and traffic can just be so crazy in LA. I mean, I have a friend in Long Beach, and if you try to drive to Long Beach from here on a Friday afternoon, it's like driving to Europe. It literally is a trek.
Actually, it reminds me, I have to tell this story because it is a nuclear related story. It's a great way to segue about a trip to Long Beach I made.
Mm.
So I was on the USS Abraham Lincoln, and Los Angeles trying to compete with New York with Fleet Week. So they're trying to call it Navy Week. And so we pulled in. So we did a big gala on the ship. Well, I invited my cousin on the ship. Well, I'm Mark Schneider. He's Rob Schneider.
Mm-hmm.
So I, gave him a tour of the ship, and we're at this party on the ship, and I'm introducing him to everyone on board. And, hey, this is my cousin Rob Schneider. This is my cousin Rob Schneider. 4 days after we leave, I'm down in the plant operating one of the reactors, and the guys they're talking about all the celebrities on board. And they're all bragging about how Rob Schneider, the actor, was on board the ship. And I was like, well, actually, at one point, there were 2 Rob Schneiders on board because his dad, who's also Rob,
So they
came for the tour as well. So it's blew their minds. They're like, oh, but keep your story. 'Cause,
Right?
That's the
Yeah.
first
Sounds
thing
good.
I thought of was Rob Schneider, the water boy. You can do it.
Yeah.
It's like, you can do it. Yeah. But wow, that's great. So you're a nuclear futurist.
yeah, it's a self-proclaimed title.
Yeah.
We all need one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really what it is I have a natural ability that I've never lived. Most people have like a 5-year plan, or they live, the paycheck to paycheck style. I've always in my mind lived 20 to 40 years in the future. So all my actions now, how they're going to impact today. So I'm always looking out decades beyond most people. So that's where the futurist comes from. And so when I see what's going on with the nuclear industry, I'm going, we're doing actions now that when they come online in 10, 15 years, they're going to have impacts that are 50, 60, 70, 100, even 1,000 years into the future.
Yeah.
And so that's where I can see that just because of what I understand of how the nuclear industry works and what we're working on. I mean, you're looking at reactors now that they just licensed today, Peach Bottom, one of the Exelon plants, was just got an extension out to 80 years. No one, when they built that plant, there was a 40-year license. No one thought it was going to be double that. But now I'm looking at it going, well, I see new technologies are coming with fuels where they're going to want to license up to 100, maybe 125, 150 years. I mean, that's a long time for a power plant that was built back in the 1960s. Right. So, and then we're going to bring new reactors online as well. So it's just kind of interesting thinking, seeing all that
ahead and seeing that develop like that. And it's now, it is it's a green form of energy, right? A lot of people, I think, are uninformed or misinformed about the whole nuclear energy and how it works. Can you explain it?
So nuclear energy, it produces the least amount of carbon dioxide of all energy forms. And when you hear a lot of people talk about wind and solar, they don't talk about the construction costs.
Yeah.
And nuclear has a relatively big construction footprint, but actually for the same amount of power output, it uses about 1/5 of the concrete that, say, solar uses, which is the big carbon emission for building a solar plant. And that's the biggest carbon footprint of a nuclear plant is the concrete and steel. Same thing with any non-combustion, so meaning burning a fossil fuel. So nuclear produces no CO2 in the process. It's literally a destruction of matter, right? This is the Einstein, literally I use Einstein, E = mc squared, right? So the E, right, is mass times the speed of light accelerated. So I'm literally destroying matter to make energy. And in this case, it's, you have a big heavy element like uranium, a neutron hits it, it splits, there's a small amount of mass loss, a lot of heat generated. I mean, someone just sent me a little infographic that shows the energy density on like a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it's got wind, it's got solar, and it's like these little tiny black bars.
Yeah.
And then it's got nuclear, and they've taped like, those old real style papers. They've taped like 6 of those together because it's like a stack of paper like this. It says, log scale is for quitters.
Yeah. That's great. And because the thing when a lot of people and probably viewers, think naturally with nuclear, it's natural for people to worry about, a meltdown and nuclear waste and the dangers of that.
HBO, whenever they came out with Chernobyl, then it's like, nuclear. And I think actually when we did the show on generational, it's almost like a generational thing where the baby boomers grew up hiding under desks and getting ready for a nuclear attack. And that's now we're entering a new generation that doesn't have that same view of nuclear that our parents and grandparents did. So it's now changing, like, how do we take nuclear and the negative connotations of it and the warheads and all of that and put it toward the use of climate change? Is it ready for that? And knowing that climate change is, to your point, that you're focused on generations from now. Does solar and wind get us incrementally to where we need to be when it comes to climate change?
I do believe solar and wind have an application. Now, if you go on my Twitter account, I'm like the biggest anti-solar and wind guy, but that's because it's Twitter and everyone's like a caricature of themselves. Right. And so a lot of people don't realize that I'm not, if you have a conversation with me, it's completely different. But if I'm on Twitter, like, wind and solar is dumb, right? Now, I mean, from a standpoint of, there is a problem that a lot of people understand with wind and solar. Wind has about a 20 to 40% capacity factor, meaning that it only operates, if you have a 100 megawatt unit, its average could be somewhere between 20 and 40 megawatts a year, per each day, right? And then solar is about 10 to 20%. So you have to have a backup to them. And so the best backup for wind and solar is a fossil plant. So I was, we were driving, and my cousin was showing me the big oil plant that's down in Southern California. It's literally taking the oil that's pumping off off the coast, and wind and solar reducing the amount of carbon emissions that's emitting. So there is a benefit in that, and I think that transitionally we should start with wind and solar and natural gas to bridge the gap until we can get all the nuclear technology, because it's a long lead time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once you have nuclear, there's a company called Oklo. They've got a 1.5 megawatt unit that will fit on a quarter acre. That's like a standard suburban home, but it'll power 1,000 homes. And
because right now we don't materialistically have the capability to create the modules that we need from a nuclear standpoint, right?
We actually have the manufacturing wise, the United States has the capability of doing all this.
Yeah.
We don't have the ability because of bureaucratic red tape to get it through it.
Got it.
So all the principles that are associated with the reactor design by Oklo, with the designs by NuScale, all the Generation 4 companies, they were all proven in the 1960s and earlier. So it's not new technology. We're just modernizing it to make sure that we don't have the issues from those test reactors, like the molten sodium reactor out in San Susanna, which is right out here. I don't know if you, but 1959 melted down.
Are those light water? That's light water.
That was a metal cooled reactor.
Wow.
So there were actually several in our test, our generation 1 phase.
Right.
Back when you don't know what you're doing, right?
Right.
And
Blowing
we
things
melted
up
down.
in here. Yeah.
We melted down several reactors through overpower events, which is like what Chernobyl had.
Generation 2 was Chernobyl, right?
Chernobyl's generation 2.
Okay.
So there's two ways to melt a reactor. There's an overpower where you get too much energy at once, and then there's a lack of cooling. Chernobyl was too much power. Fukushima was lack of cooling capabilities.
And then 3 Mile, I'm from Pennsylvania, so
Okay.
of course, Westinghouse and you've got the 3 Mile Island and all
Yep.
of that, those kind of disasters.
And that was a lack of cooling with a gross
Malfunction, right.
misunderstanding by operators living with deficiencies. And it give you an idea at the time, I actually worked with guys that started working at nuclear power plants at the time of 3 Mile Island, which was in 1979, right?
Right.
So it's a bunch of boomers operating reactors, by the way.
Right. Not to do any generational titles or anything.
Because I know you guys had a whole
We've
episode
moved
on
past all
generational
that.
stuff. So I'll poke a little bit here. But he said at the time, the license class to operate the reactor was 2 months, and they extended it to 3. It's now almost 2 years to get a license, right? So what we've done in the last 40 years is really improve our knowledge, ability, and fundamentals. And then if you look at what we have as far as protective equipment with more redundancies, the nuclear industry has taken these designs designed before computers, right, using slide rules because calculators weren't even a thing. And they've, are using computers now with new technologies to upgrade them. So there's
So what do we do with all these archaic nuclear reactors then that are sitting around, that are just chilling there, that we need to either update or put some kind of infrastructure around?
So they are doing a lot of updating. I know that the big one is computer control updating. And so you basically rip the control room out because the control rooms are literally old analog dials and knobs, right? It's literally something out of a Simpsons episode. It's absolutely hilarious. But they're going to flat panel screen console systems, computers. So they're working on that. Upgrading nuclear technologies is an ongoing thing as far as the instrumentation and control, the aspect of how to operate it. But the principle of a reactor, going back to the very first ones, the Chicago pile, in the 1930s, going up to today is the same thing as I have, an atom split and all that piping. We're still going to use piping and equipment. That's not going to really change. So there's not a whole lot of technological upgrades, but there are some. But the old ones, they'll last basically forever. It's a big chunk of steel that's this thick.
And it's all about decarbonizing.
Yes.
Right. And in a faster way than what solar could do. Because right now we're, fossil fuels and coal is our massive, reason. And it's obviously pumping out all this carbon. And, as a consumer, everyone's trying to do their part. And I think climate change is such a big topic. You're like, how do you as one person can make a difference? It's like, do I stop eating red meat? And like, do I, there's all these like little things. And that's where the nuclear discussion comes in, where it's like, if we want to make a bigger impact faster, does nuclear make more sense in terms of like, hey, everyone stop eating red meat so there's less carbon, and that type of thing. So what's your point of view in terms of like the impact from a consumer standpoint as it pertains to nuclear and what they're doing personally.
Yeah. So as far as, I mean, see if I can answer it in a way that kind of goes back in. I would say primarily a support of nuclear energy. California actually has a bill that's been proposed to classify nuclear as a renewable energy.
Really?
So that was being proposed by one of your, is it representatives, delegates? I'm not. Each state has their own name.
Yeah.
But it's being proposed into the California, legislative branch to propose to have nuclear classified as renewable energy, which would open up the door for subsidies for renewable energy to go to nuclear. California has spent $100 billion on renewable energy, wind and solar, and hydro, and all of it makes up
there's
25% of your energy footprint.
wow.
Diablo Canyon, the one operating nuclear power station, has 2 reactors and is 9% of your power output for the entire state. With $100 billion, I could replace your entire energy grid with nuclear, including Diablo Canyon, your hydro, everything, for $100 billion.
That's incredible. I'm thinking about viewers who I know that people are thinking like, oh, but I'm worried about meltdown. I'm worried about plutonium and uranium. The waste and what's happened to nuclear waste. And I really think because I did some research into it, obviously, over the last year since I've known you, and from what I can see, it actually eats the waste off the machines and you can reuse it for.
Yeah. So you brought up there's the 3 issues: the waste, weapons, and meltdown. I like simple. So,
yeah, right.
And and the weapon, and it's funny because they're all kind of tied together.
Yes.
But the big thing is the waste, right? What do we do with the waste? So
right.
The current reactors generate a lot of waste. We only use less than 1% of the energy out of the raw uranium we mine. It's just the type of fuel the type of reactors we use can only use a specific grade of uranium.
Okay.
The new generation reactors, like the Oklo design, anything from the TerraPower design, that's Bill Gates' company, would actually be able to use nuclear waste as its fuel. And we know we can do this, and we're doing it on planet Earth right now. There's a reactor in Russia called the BN-800. Her first fuel loadout was nuclear weapons. 6 months after it went online in 2016, that weapons material is no longer capable of being a bomb ever again. It's been annihilated, destroyed to the point where it's not. And then they just shut it down at the beginning of this year and brought it back online. And when they refueled it, they put new fuel in. It was waste from one of their old light water reactors. So we are doing this on planet Earth right now, and the Russians are leading the charge. And if you think about it, we have 96 operating reactors, 2 under construction that are of the old design that produces that large quantity of waste. And then we have several, like 40 reactors that are shut down. There's like 72 sites that have nuclear waste at it. The U.S., if we switch to all nuclear and were to use that waste, to about 5,000 years of waste sitting at sites. That doesn't include our weapons. It doesn't include weapons waste. And it doesn't include depleted uranium from the enrichment process. If you add all that in, the U.S. has about 10,000 years of energy without having to dig, mine, drill, or anything. It's all just sitting there waiting to be used.
So do you feel that right now, because it's the bureaucracies get involved in red tape of like, nuclear, and it's kind of there's obviously countries that are taking advantage of it, like Sweden and France. They're obviously trying to build and decarbonize and utilize what nuclear offers. When it comes to the U.S., we're a little bit more stodgier when it comes to that kind of thing. Do you feel that we're at a point now where we're trying to change everyone's frame of mind around nuclear to get a little bit out of the, oh my God, there's meltdowns type of thing? So it's a change in rhetoric and a change of how we communicate what nuclear is. Yeah,
and that's really my big role in this is, I take, what my experiences of operating nuclear reactors, right? Because I've spent over 20 years operating them, from small submarines, medium-sized aircraft carriers up to large, commercial reactors. And so taking my experience as an operator, a lot of people call me an engineer or scientist. I'm an operator. I'm the guy turning valves, operating stuff. And being able to translate that, it's really a blue collar job, and being able to translate the really smart people, the engineers and scientists, because I have to speak their language to be able to operate, and being able to translate that into something that the public can understand, so that the average person can then say, hey, yes, I understand that there were meltdowns, but that was the old technology before computers. And then today we use computers to model them. They're super precise in their modeling that we can prove a reactor every single time. We do it. The Navy does it every 6 months, prove a design of one of their reactors, because they're building reactors all the time. So we are seeing that. We're seeing a big improvement. And when I started this a little over a year ago, and it was a nonstop fight. And then about 6 months ago, it has literally come down to the only people who really are detractors now, they'll reply with Chernobyl. That's it. They won't give me any context. They'll just say Chernobyl.
Period.
Yeah.
Walk out.
Mic drop. Several of the presidential candidates are pro-nuclear. Cory Booker and Yang and Biden and some other are all pro-nuclear.
Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, Amy Klobuchar. Elizabeth Warren backed off her anti-nuclear stance. Biden has a pro-nuclear stance. Really, it's actually easier to go through and label the anti-nuclear. And that's Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders are the only anti-nuclear candidates in the entire field. And that includes libertarians and I believe Green Party as well.
Now, do you feel it would also benefit from a economic standpoint in terms of jobs from coal mining? That you've got the blue collar towns that are like, okay, coal is our, fossil fuels is what we live and breathe on. How do we translate that into then the nuclear side of things?
So this is where a history lesson is great. So when the nuclear industry basically took off in the 1960s and 70s, coal was our number one form of energy. And they needed to man these nuclear power plants. Well, the Navy was still relatively in its infancy and wasn't able to man it. So literally they said, I need people who understand how a large-scale steam engine works. So I'm going to go to all the coal plants. So they went to the coal plants, and the coal plants staffed the first nuclear reactors. They operate under a very similar principle, right? Once you have steam, you're turning a turbine, which makes your electricity. It's how you create that steam, which is what is different between nuclear and coal, whether I'm burning a fossil fuel, whether I'm using at some of these, the solar plants, I'm concentrating my solar into a salt that then is circulated through. You're still generating steam to turn a turbine. And so a coal worker, a guy who works at a coal facility, understands that very well. They also understand the OSHA requirements. All this, it's funny, the same regulations that the coal industry has in a lot of cases, just from a safety standpoint, EPA requirements, the nuclear industry has to follow as well. They're just more regulated. So they're actually required to, they actually have someone coming in there or actually basically effectively lives on the site. They have 2 resident engineers from the NRC that are there that are saying, hey, you're missing this mark, you're missing this mark, you're missing this mark, or, by the way, I'm writing this up, you're going to get fined for it.
Whereas coal is like, we'll just let it slide. And then there's, at some points.
I don't want to say it's let it slide. The EPA doesn't have someone stationed at a coal plant. Whereas the NRC has 2 people assigned to every nuclear power station to observe their operations.
Is that do you feel that's defense in terms of making sure that it couldn't be compromised, or a fear-based type of if this melted down or if something happened, we need someone here just in case. Whereas coal, you have a coal mining accident, yes.
Yeah.
But is it going to affect hundreds of thousands of people?
Yeah. So the purpose of it is regulatory oversight. So they're there to make sure that we're meeting all the requirements and from an operating and maintenance and all that standpoint. And they are also a liaison to the federal government in the event of an accident. So every nuclear power station has a technical center where all the senior management would be there to direct the large scale actions in the event of a major accident or even a hurricane, right? They'll man this up. And off of that room is an office dedicated for the NRC so that they could then communicate with the NRR, the nuclear regulatory regulator, something like that. His title's the NRR out of Maryland. And he's the head guy overseeing the entire commercial nuclear fleet. And so they would be able to communicate with that person. they're the eyes and ears for them out in the field.
You bring up a good point when it comes to, within the climate change, we're seeing all of these natural disasters starting to increase, right? There's a lot more Category 5 hurricanes, we're just seeing forest fires, all of that. And in those cases, you then have to close the plant, right? And everything has to kind of like,
how does that work?
How does that work in terms of like natural disasters?
Concern over earthquakes.
So there was a hurricane that came through last year that came up and hit North Carolina, and in preparation, they'll shut it down. The reactors at Fukushima, by the way, at the site at Fukushima Daiichi, there were 10 reactors in the Fukushima prefecture. And you've only heard about the accident at Fukushima Daiichi. Fukushima Daiichi had 4 units and had no issues. They were able to, they're still shut down since that because the Japanese government decided to shut it down. But so if there's an earthquake, there's automatic seismic sensors that will cause the reactor to shut off automatically.
Oh, wow.
So if you have an earthquake, there's actual sensors in there that will trip their unit.
What kind of a risk factor is that as far as it working? Is it pretty reliable?
It's a pretty reliable system because that's what shut the reactors down in Fukushima.
Okay.
Was the actual seismic indications. Now, that made the disaster less worse, but it was their lack of cooling that it caused when the tsunami washed out their emergency systems. They were there to keep the reactor cool. You have something called residual heat. And that's what happened at Fukushima 3 Mile Island, was losing the ability to remove the heat from the process, right? When you turn off a coal plant, right, it's going to be hot and it cools down, but you're not generating a whole lot more heat. When you turn off a nuclear reactor, you're still generating 8% power output in heat because of when you split that atom, those fission products are radioactive. Yeah. And so they have to release that energy and it comes out in the form of heat.
So as far as, and I'm very curious, and I know that a lot of viewers will be curious too. So when you have once you have the waste, I know we talk about the recycling the waste, what entities can that then be used for once you have the waste? I know there's like several different ones that.
So you've got the waste that's from a commercial reactor,
right?
And that waste, really, it's the amount of materials in it are so minuscule that it's not worth doing a lot of reprocessing unless you're going to put it back in a nuclear reactor, right? So you put that in a nuclear reactor and you consume it again, right? In the Generation 4 reactors that are not only safe but meltdown, but can consume the waste. Right. And then when you get done, you take that new waste stream out. I like using 100 tons because it's a simple round number. Say I take 100 tons of Gen 2 waste, put it in a Gen 4 reactor, consume it over 20 years. I take 100 tons out. There's no longer any nuclear material in it, so it's not a proliferation concern. So I can process it now. Okay. All right. 60% of it isn't radioactive. So coming immediately out of the reactor, 60% isn't radioactive. I can chemically process it and I can dispose of all that because it's salts. So it'd be relatively simple. And then your long waste stream is only 300 years vice the 10,000 or more years or 100,000 or more years. Because really the waste that everyone's concerned about that lasts that long is nuclear fuel. So that's what everyone's concerned about.
Right.
So I've consumed all that.
And that's been consumed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I have 60 tons remaining. Well, 25 tons have industrial applications, 15 tons have medical applications, and now I have...
this can be used in all these different fields.
Yeah. So
medical,
right?
What else? Industrial.
Medical and industrial.
And then what's Bill Gates? He's doing one too with water. How does his affect?
So Bill Gates has 2 designs. Yeah. TerraPower has 2 designs. They have a molten salt reactor and they have a liquid sodium reactor. Okay. So the liquid sodium reactor is much like the BN800 out in Russia. That's a liquid sodium cooled reactor. And then the molten salt reactor, it could either be literally table salt. It's just, you basically heat it up until it turns into a liquid. When you get salts at that, different salts, when they get up to that temperature, it becomes about the same viscosity as the technical term. It's water. It's not like oil, right, where it's a thick, goopy liquid. It's thin like water, so it'll flow like water. But what you can do is you can melt your waste into the nuclear waste into that, and it will dissolve it. And then you have what's called liquid fission, because your reactor is then the coolant is also your fuel source. And so you're running it through the cycle and it's causing the reaction. And so it's a very simple reprocessing. All I have to do is cut open an old fuel assembly, drop the nuclear pellets in there, it'll dissolve it, and then I can go run it, take the whole reactor out. There's a company called Terrestrial Energy in Canada where they literally operate the reactor till they've run out all the fuel, but they can add fuel still. But then they take that reactor, they pick it up, they put it in a storage location inside their containment structure, and then put a new one in.
So what are like the examples in like the simplest terms, like the medical industry and industrial, like where would you use that?
So with medical industry, you talk about cancer treatments, radiation therapy, right?
Okay.
That's done with cobalt-60 typically, which is a byproduct of the nuclear process, whether it's directly generated like they do now, or it could be extracted, or like barium treatments, things like that. So basically, if you want to create a large gamma radiation source, you can do localized radiation. You need something that generates high energy gammas, which your waste can do that. So that's your waste stream from a Gen 4 reactor could do that. Right. And you also need high energy gammas for things like fire, or things like, it's called radiography. It's like a super powerful X-ray that's used on piping systems. So any shipyard, any large skyscraper construction, they basically use a super mega powerful X-ray that is only made from these high energy gammas from the nuclear process, that they can then go through and look for piping defects so that you don't, cause a major catastrophe on a ship or something like that with the structural system.
So how do we I think anytime anyone brings up nuclear, it's like, bleh. We're not really taught it in science. I mean, it's a big topic, right? I mean, we could there's novels and hours spent on it. And now it's becoming even more of a bigger topic nowadays as it pertains to climate change, and are there other options of us trying to utilize nuclear? So the biggest hurdle I see is the education to like the everyday person.
Making it really simple.
And soft popping it in a bit, because like the minute you hear nuclear, you're going to get all the baby boomers completely freaked out. You know what I mean? Because they're like, and there's a lot of people that have written books that were, complete environmentalists who did research on nuclear and now are all into nuclear. But it's like, how do you simplify it down? Because it's a science, and there's a lot to it, and how do you get people to overcome what the nuclear word? I just think they need to create a new word, to be honest. It has such a negative connotation. Immediately, it's like red.
That it's funny. There's trying to reduce some of the words. So this is my challenge, right?
Yeah.
This is the big thing, and I'm sure you're both well aware that Scott Adams and I communicate frequently about this, and we actually created the.
He's a big supporter.
Oh, he's huge.
Yeah, I watch him talk about it. Man. Yeah. He's great.
And so we crafted the message of Gen 4 nuclear, it's safe for meltdown, and eats nuclear waste, because you combine it. And the word nuclear, right? The argument you have, we should just go away from the word. And I'm going to counter that by saying there were the same fears of the word atomic in the 1950s, right? And so, because in the 1950s, they were called atomic reactors, they were atomic weapons, atomic. Everyone saw the bombs drop in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The boomers are all hiding under their desks.
Right.
And so Dwight D. Eisenhower had a challenge of, how do I take this word atom, atomic, and, say it's something that's useful. And he created the Atoms for Peace program. And what came out of the Atoms for Peace program is the commercial nuclear industry that built so many reactors, they drove the price of electricity down to where it's no longer viable to build themselves. That's what happened. That's why if you actually go around this nation, there's probably, for every operating site, there's 2 sites that were licensed for construction, there were 2 licensed sites. One was licensed and never built. The other was licensed and construction started on a nuclear reactor that they stopped.
Because they don't need it.
Because they drove the
up.
Price of electricity down to where it was no longer financially viable. Wow. So that's how, when you take something, a national initiative like the Atoms for Peace program, then you can actually change the conversation, and you can get people to drive towards this. And so with Mike Schellenberger's help, talking about the environmentalist that was shutting down nuclear plants and now hates himself for it and is gone completely pro-nuclear, right? He was in front of Congress and said, we needed a national nuclear strategy. Well, my wife works in the industry, and she goes, I don't like that. I said, you mean a national nuclear power strategy? She goes, that's it, right? So I'm proposing what I call the national nuclear power strategy, which is a 3-phase process. Start with what we can build, which are large-scale reactors like they're building out in Vogtle. then switch to the smaller module, light water designs of the current fuels, and then ultimately ending with the Generation 4 reactors.
I think too, when proposing that, and I've heard actually Scott Adams talk about this too. You're very, from what I've seen on your website and the way you express things, you're very visual. So I think showing people the visuals of how it all would work helps get it in simple, kind of understanding terms that people can see. And I know you're good at that.
Yeah, it's funny because I do have my blind spots.
Yeah.
Because there was the waste argument. It was like I just was getting so frustrated. Because like, what about the leaks? What about the leaks? I'm just getting, what leaks are you talking about? And it suddenly dawned on me was that people were taking the waste in Hanford, which is weapons production waste. It's not commercial nuclear reactors. And they were thinking that all the nuclear reactor waste was this liquid that's in these containers. And I'm like, it just dawned on me. It's like, wait a minute. It's a bunch of little pencils basically stuck together.
Oh yeah.
That's then stuck in a container that there's no water in it. It's filled with helium.
So yeah,
it's almost creating like an infograph that, or how's the saying go? If you can explain to like you have children, if you could explain it to a 7-year-old and they understand it, then the rest of the U.S. would understand it. If there's ways that you can if your kid understands it, then you always have to. You don't want to dumb things down for people, but it's. The vast population, when you look at news articles and everything's at like a 5th grade level, so that people can understand it. Yeah. So if you can hit that mark, and I love that you added power because I think that's like, okay, it's not just nuclear. You know what I mean? The minute you're like, oh, power. Oh, that's a nice, it just as a feeling that words have, and the way and the context in them.
So it's interesting because I see my role as that translator, right? Taking the super smart engineers, right? Because they're at that PhD level communication, and I'm like, all right, here's what this guy's saying. All right, let me put that through my mind translator, and then I think about it from the standpoint of could a soldier who has to have a picture to understand how to reassemble, disassemble his M16, could he understand that, right? And so that's the way. The reason why I say that is I did a deployment where I was the nuclear operator in the Navy, pretending to be soldier for a year, and I said, wow. I can't make them become sailors, so why don't I learn how to become a soldier? So that's my standpoint is I can't make, Kira and Geoff become nuclear engineers, but what I can do is I can take the nuclear message and I can explain it with pictures, graphics, language that the average American can understand so that way you can understand it and then go, oh, let me talk to you about this. And I'll tell you, the craziest thing, what I love about Twitter and social media are the number of people that are like, hey, I was talking to my sister about nuclear power, and I told her this, this, and this, and it works so well. So I get that positive feedback, and I'm constantly I throw up these stupid little polls. So they're absolutely hilarious to find out. Hey, should we go with fast reactor or thorium reactor? Right? Should we and I literally crowdsource. What works for you? Do you like calling it this? Do you like calling it that?
Right.
What was the picture you threw up? You were showing the solid, right? You threw a picture up of the solid.
It was of a fuel assembly.
And that made people immediately register.
That's what you have to do. If you're changing the language around something that has always, notoriously, since the beginning, has had some negative connotations around it, your job as a linguist and trying to figure out a completely new language.
And it was amazing. So I did that exact same thing. I printed off a picture of an actual spent fuel cask with the fuel assemblies when I went to speak with the Speaker of the House of Delegates of West Virginia, coal-loving West Virginia.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I go here, and I was asked to, present, how nuclear could help West Virginia. And I said, because waste, they have a law in the books that says they can't build unless Yucca Mountain is open. Right. And so they're going to have to repeal that. So I literally went in there and in front of the Speaker of the House of Delegates, I threw a picture of that. He looked at it, set it aside because it was like, we didn't talk about it anymore. It was just, all right, we're good.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing how that is where you have to literally, and I applaud your efforts in trying to take MIT doctorate type of technology, or terminology and turning into
it's not easy to do.
ABCs,
Not easy to do.
So, and the biggest I guess my question, with the time allotted, I'd be interested to hear, where do we go from here? Is it about getting more funding to nuclear? Is it about going to Congress or is it about education first of the communities and then having them push it?
I'll attach mine onto her, which is, why aren't people, is our current president, you don't hear him talk about it a lot. What's his opinion on it? Rick Perry, I think, was doing.
Yeah. So Rick Perry and his, and Brulette, his successor, are very pro-nuclear. So, and they were very vocal about it. I'm absolutely 100% certain that the president of the United States is pro-nuclear. And I know this because his uncle went to MIT as a nuclear engineer. So he understands nuclear. Now, he takes the clean energy standpoint, and he doesn't want to, I think, pick a winner per se.
He's leaving it open.
Yeah, and this is me mind reading for him a little bit.
Yeah.
Shout out to Scott Adams for using mind reading.
Scott Adams mind reading.
Yeah.
I know it. It's one of his terms. It's great. It's brilliant.
So, I think there's an aspect of we need to get people to talk about it. So there is that, if we can educate people, we can get the rumbling going, right? Once, the climate change is the big issue that everyone is concerned about. And my position on climate change is a very interesting position. And I say that climate change is a problem, whether it's a real problem and we need nuclear energy as the best solution to decarbonize our energy, or it's a psychological problem. And the best way to prevent the destruction of our economy through going to these untenable large-scale wind and solar projects would be to use nuclear energy. I don't care whether you believe it's true or not. Nuclear solves for both. So that's the stance I take.
Right.
And if we can get both the left hand and the right hand to meet in the middle and say, we need nuclear energy, we can get the, getting the education up there. People will talk about it more. And then they can start driving what's going on with Congress. There is a lot of legislation, pro-nuclear legislation, that is going through Congress right now with co-sponsors of Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Republican, Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, Lamar Alexander, Republican, Cory Booker, Democrat. So there is a bipartisan group that's supporting it. And so when I talk nuclear, it almost becomes an up versus down or a discussion as opposed to left versus right, because the hardcore renewable folks are going to always be anti-nuclear, and the hardcore oil, gas, and petroleum are going to be anti-nuclear.
Right.
We can easily grab the middle that say, hey, I want the most energy efficient, best form of energy that does the least amount of environmental impact of all. And that doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party. If that's what you want, and I think that's 90% of the nation, they could get there.
Wow. Well, this has all been just very informative, and I think especially for viewers to hear this and kind of educating me and her even more than what we already knew. And just, I feel like a couple other things in general. What's your opinion on the shift gears like this? Everybody's talking about the coronavirus right now. What's your thought on that?
Well, it's interesting because as he was speaking, it reminded me of the parallel to coronavirus, where it's like, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. Is there a solution? It's just more like, where's the middle, where it's like the two movies, where it's like,
props to
That's right.
again.
Right. Where it's like,
we've done a podcast on two movies
Yeah.
on one screen.
Yeah, so it's like it doesn't matter if you believe that it's a, if it's a big deal or not. What is the solution around it? You know what I mean? Because it's obviously here.
So my take on it is, I joked that when I was coming out here, and I'm traveling most of March, I said, I'm not afraid of Mexican light beer.
Corona light.
Right. So, and that's me being tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Now I am washing my hands more. I am being mindful of, being around people that are coughing.
Yeah.
I'm noticing when I'm touching my face, and I did it way too many times during this. So I'm being mindful. So I'm not taking the, oh my God, I need to go buy masks and, live in a bubble and all that.
Get the bunker ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stock food.
Now I did, when I get a shop on the military installations because I'm a retiree. And so I went to the commissary, which is the grocery store, and they have MREs for sale. So I bought a half dozen of them. Right?
Just
Why
in
not?
case.
And you know what? They're all gone. My kids thought it was really fun because you get the little hot sauce packet, little hot sauce thing, and you have to use a little chemical heater. So they thought it was a lot of fun to
You're like, no, this is for the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, this is for the zombie apocalypse, and you're eating the zombie apocalypse food. But I remember sitting there like going, like I had a bunch of rice and beans, and I'm like, am I really this ridiculous? And I put it back. Like I take this weird thing where it's like, I don't want to be caught off guard, so I'm gonna keep sufficient amounts of toilet paper, and I'm not going to fight people over toilet paper.
Right.
Those videos have been going with people
No,
fighting.
I haven't seen them. People are fighting.
Oh, you got to see them.
Oh, like-
It's like fights break.
It's like Black Friday all over again.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
for toilet paper, not DVDs.
It's like-
you
Yes.
know?
Truly.
To put the Gen X perspective on it, it's like the Elmo doll of the 90s.
Oh,
yeah.
genius.
And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle figures.
Yes.
People used to fight to get.
The Elmo
April
was
the hard one to get.
amazing.
Yeah,
Elmo.
tickle me
They
Elmo.
were like $50, and then people were selling them on eBay for like 10 grand, and now they're back to being like $50.
I'm going to really blow your mind and say it was before eBay existed.
Was it? No.
Or it might have been the
It was, like,
infancy
right
because
there,
people
I
were
think.
selling them on the radio.
What's the
That's right. They
radio?
were selling it on the radio.
Yeah, they would call
Imagine
in.
that.
They would call in and buy ads and do it on the radio.
No.
I think eBay was in its infancy, but not a lot.
Not
of people
like
were using
right
that.
there.
But there
Oh
were
my God,
ads in
hilarious.
newspapers for them. Like really dating myself here as a Gen.
No, that's all right.
I mean,
You're allowed to be a Gen X. We won't hold it against you.
I mean, my
Much.
opinion on no, totally. Like, in my opinion on the coronavirus is, attached to what you said is that it's really hard to tell. That there's definitely two movies, like Sam says, and one of the movies, people are not as concerned, and you see. I look at Twitter and I see, and I was on a TV set yesterday, and there was. I mean, people are concerned, obviously, but it's not at these levels where they're going to stock food and they're going to do that and get masks. I mean, people are making jokes. There's a lot of jokes going around about one guy said something about it's putting him through Purell or something like his coronavirus is putting me through
That's
Purell.
nice.
And I see that, and one guy said this is the time when we need to be going into an escape room and then not trying to get out. This is the one. And so, but then you see people that are really, really serious, and so I see these two reactions to it, and I think both are legit. And it's not that the people aren't concerned; their level of concern is just not at the I'm scared level that the other group is. There's a difference.
So I know that there's data statistics out there, but I also look at 10 years ago, or 12 years ago was when the swine flu outbreak, and the worst thing that we got out of it was Angry Birds. I mean, that's why they picked the pigs.
And they made a shit ton of money off of
Yeah.
it. So
Right? And so I have to go, if the swine flu in 2008 timeframe had caused, we had the social media because, I mean, people weren't really living in social media to the same degree we are now. Would swine flu have been the coronavirus of fears, right? And so that's the perspective I take. As I go, 12 years ago, we had the swine flu.
That is so fascinating.
And so that was
It's brilliant what you're saying.
And before that was SARS, right? And I remember, early mid 2000s, and I remember, making jokes about it. I'm a young sailor, and someone, starts coughing, and we all called it Sarthrax because we all had our anthrax shots, right? So we made jokes about it, like someone who's coughing. We're on a submarine in a sealed container,
Right.
We're not getting this thing,
who's
and everyone
gonna
who's got whatever crud is, wherever they're coughing, we're joking that they have SARS, right? But no one's really, no one was super concerned about it. And so I have to ask myself, are we experiencing that same thing? Now, there's a bunch of data, I think, that says that coronavirus is worse than those, but I don't know. And this is, and I talk about this from going kind of tailoring this back into the nuclear, is there's so many variables involved, right?
Right.
Specifically nuclear construction, everyone wants to say, well, this one variable, like, let's look at all the variables. And so you're doing a multivariate analysis, right? A single variable analysis is hard enough for most people. If you add in 3, it's nearly impossible.
Oh no, the head's exploded.
And now we're at 7.2 billion human beings, which each one of them is a variable in coronavirus. We don't know.
Well, and I think that's the problem. I mean, we talked about before the podcast or before the show that we don't know. And because of the lack of information becomes a plethora of just vomiting up information, whether it's like real or not. You don't know if these statistics that are coming out are right. China's saying something different than what the World Health Organization is saying.
Look.
So I think the lack, and when it comes to nuclear, I think that's an important part where if you're spreading out a message of like, hey, nuclear power is this, and this is a sustainable, a great alternative that we should be, utilizing and looking at, it's getting every single fact out there.
Yeah.
Whereas like this, we're just like, we don't know, and that's where there's confusion, there's profit when there's confusion type of thing, and at this point, there's so many conspiracy theories as it pertains to it that it causes mass hysteria,
But, And the variables become so many that literally everybody can't process everything that's happening with coronavirus. And so we just defer to whatever movie we were in. But that tweet that I sent that you and I were going back and forth on too, it's like, there's like a 3.5%, people death rate on it, which is obviously very sad and stuff. But
that's assuming you know who all the infected are. Yeah.
And so in that location, they were measuring that in China before it got bigger. And obviously the risk factor in China was higher at first because people were close together. So there's all these different things playing into what the stats are that is it's easy to get misinformation and data that isn't quite what it really should be. And then people make judgments on it. So you wonder, it goes back to what you said a second ago, which is how much is social media creating things that aren't there? Like, it's obviously very serious, but how much is it creating things that aren't there that's freaking us out?
Yeah.
I think that's such a great point.
Yeah. Well, and I'll use kind of an example, right? And we'll talk about, today someone will probably fall off a wind turbine and die doing maintenance on it.
Yeah.
Right. That happens basically every day because of the amount of wind turbines around the planet. In Fukushima, we destroyed 4 of the 6 reactors and not one person died.
But you never hear about that.
But you never hear about
You never hear about
Right.
that.
See that? So how do you get around the communication of things like that? Do you know what I mean? As it pertains to any topic, and as it pertains to nuclear, it's like you never hear about that.
Those 6 units at Fukushima probably put out more power than the entire wind footprint in Japan.
That's insane.
Wow.
Well, you have a large task on your hands to try and if you can get social media to back you, that's the biggest thing, really, if you think about it. If you want a storm surge of something to happen, just start, getting out there with everything.
I just joke that I'm the dad with the phone that had a good idea. Because that's literally how it started out.
Yeah.
I was listening to Scott, and I love telling a story, and maybe it's a good way to end it, is Scott Adams had Naval Ravikant on.
He's brilliant.
Yeah. And it was, I think the Periscope was the Periscope that will change your world, or something like that.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And so literally I listened to it, and we have a room in our house called the game room. It's a little kind of living room area where my kids hang out. And I listened to it, and I sat down in there and I wrote out my 21 tweet thread, initial thing that I called the Green Nuclear Deal.
I remember this.
And then Scott quote tweets me, "Have you ever seen something that could save 1 billion lives?" And then I'm on the radio, and now here I am in LA talking with 2 of the coolest people that I've ever met.
She's cool. I'm not.
I mean, in your own way.
I think about, I'm just a guy that I was ready. I was happy with what I was doing. I had a trajectory I was going down, and all of a sudden, now I'm, doing this, and it's so much fun. It's exciting. It's new. I'm learning things. I mean, I was in the Speaker of the House of Delegates of West Virginia,
which is unbelievable that they open the doors there. Anyone that lives in the East Coast or Pennsylvania and the Appalachians understands what a big deal that is.
Huge.
I have the personal cell phone numbers of at least a dozen senators running in my phone.
Yeah.
Who am I? I'm just a guy who had an idea. And it was a good one, apparently.
We all need it. I think it's spectacular. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. This was such a pleasure.
Here at Geoff and Kira Live, we are the future, and the future is Geoff
and
Kira Live. Mark Schneider. This was amazing.
was awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks. Appreciate it.